All right, happy Friday, and thank you for joining us. Welcome to the first ever Webcast Friday. Now, before we get into it, I'd like to take a minute or two just to let you know what Webcast Friday is and who we are. My name is Chris Armstrong, and I'm the Multimedia Manager at InterWorks. InterWorks is a people-focused technology consulting agency based in Stillwater, Oklahoma, with offices in Oklahoma City, Tulsa, Chicago, New York, San Francisco, Christchurch in London in the UK, Germany, and the Netherlands. Webcast Fridays are 20 to 30-minute presentations that show off some of the more interesting work we do, hoping that you find it informative and inspiring. We'll have a time of Q&A at the end, so feel free to use the Q&A button in the meeting, and we'll get to those at the end. This Webcast Fridays happen every other Friday, and you can find all of our future Webcast Fridays at interworks.com/events. All right, now that that's out of the way, let's jump into it. Today we have Eli, who is one of our systems administrators at InterWorks, and he kind of came up with this little pet project of analyzing Apache data through with some Tableau stuff. And so it's very much like an after-hours thing for him. And we're excited to have him on. So Eli, I'm going to do my best to give controls to you.
All righty. Let's share up the screen here. And, all right. I think we're good. Okay, so again, like Chris said, this has been kind of an after-hours project for me. At the end of the day, I work on managing our InterWorks hosting environment as long as our internal environment, trying to make sure that runs smooth and we keep that up to scale with where it needs to be. So one of the things we have as we host quite a few sites is that sometimes people will build content on there that can get exploited, causing issues to the hosting platform, or we'll have somebody upload something that is very heavy in terms of bandwidth or anything like that that can overall degrade the performance of our servers. So the idea was, while we can still go in through something like a command line and start tracking all this down, the idea is we go through a very similar process each time. And it'd be nice to be able to just have some kind of quick way to pull in that recent data and see if we can tell quickly where things are going awry. Which is where this came in. So at the end of the day, it's not a super clean dashboard or anything. It's meant more for raw utilitarian purposes of analyzing what's going on a web server and being able to like quickly see if a site is causing a problem, a web page, if there's a specific host that's being malicious or anything like that. So the first two views are going to be a very rough overview of bandwidth on the server as well as calls that are going on. But then we'll dig a little bit more into figuring out how things are happening on each site and what pages those are happening and where they're coming from. So starting out, just a very simple page, right? We're going to look at the total bandwidth across everything in our environment. Realistically, we have a lot more than 5 sites, but we just pulled these in as a sample because they had a good spread of data. So as we can see, there's nothing too abnormal in here. We can see our heavy-hitting sites. We have they've all been obfuscated, but C site and an A site are definitely consuming a lot more per day than any of these other ones. So realistically, if something's going to happen, we're gonna be looking at these 2 sites. That being said, though, we noticed that of our consumers, we have an interesting agent over here coming on where we can look at the aggregate bandwidth across everyone connected and see that our second highest consumer over the past month consumed 3 gigs of data. But our highest consumer consumed 61, so nearly 20 times more than the second place consumer. So like, what's going on there? That immediately shows us that maybe there's an error in configuration, or that maybe a site has had something happen to it, or it's looping back, anything like that. So we can immediately, though, just click on that. And while this graph isn't necessarily the most beautiful, it can narrow down immediately that this is all traffic coming from C site. So it's one specific site that has something incorrectly configured in it. So the next step is to start figuring out what and where that's happening. So as we move along, we can start looking at things from a little more granular perspective, which is going to be HTTP calls. And for anyone who's not familiar with this, what this means is every time you request a site, an HTTP call is made to the web server in a handful of forms, but typically it's either a GET or a POST. And all a GET does is it says, give me a piece of data. That's requesting the web page that you're browsing to or anything like that. On the other hand, it could be a post, which is submitting data or information to the site. So something like a login form can be a post, or uploading like a blog or anything like that. You're basically sending data back. So those are the two key ones that we really want to focus on. There are more that are available, but realistically, we tend to not see issues with those. But we still have the data and we can pull them in if needed. So we can easily see across our entire site there was an interesting spike on April 24th, where we went from maybe an average sustained 10,000 HTTP calls every day to 74,000. So something happened on that day that it could have been somebody trying to like brute force the site or a form getting exploited or anything like that. But that shows us an anomaly that is unnormal. The other side is this could actually be some kind of boom in content, right? Maybe a blog was uploaded that is very hot or something like that, and we can actually track this down from that perspective as well. At the end of the day, something like Google Analytics is going to handle that a bit better, right? But it's still cool to see that you can pull all this in just raw from the log files and get that into Tableau and start looking at it. So realistically, we see this boom, we can click on it, and we would be able to see that almost all of it came from C site down here. So again, the site with the high bandwidth, we're also noticing that there's some potential issues or interest based on the content. The other thing is we can actually see across these sites who the highest consumers are. And again, that previous consumer had 61 gigs of bandwidth. We also see that it has 3 million HTTP calls it's made, and we're actually just looking at GETs now. So this IP has requested data 3 million times over the month, whereas compared to the second highest user, only 62,000. And we can verify that that's just hitting only C site by clicking on it. It's going to scan through, and we're going to see this. And here we can also see that this IP is responsible for 49,000 of those 72,000 calls that happened on April 24th. So this gives us a good idea of a site that we may want to dig into if there's some kind of issues going on or anything like that, or retroactively go back and see if that correlates to some kind of upload. You can also analyze the post data, which in this case we don't have any current issues with or anything like that, somebody's site having a form exploited, but you will see that at times where people don't implement things like CAPTCHAs and have like email submission forms, people will try and exploit those and just start posting data through it. And you'll be able to see a huge increase or spike in any kind of data like that, any kind of post call that signifies that maybe that's happening. So moving on, when we're going to probably take a look further into C site, we can click on it and see, make sure we're looking at the proper users and find that there isn't really anything else that should be affecting this that much. So let's take a little further look at these HTTP responses, and we can see compared to our other sites that C site actually is far more active than anything else as well. At the end of the day, we can click down here, and it's gonna give us all the response codes. And what these mean is every time you make a GET request or a call request to a website, you're going to get a response on what happened with that. A 200, which is what we have represented as 2XX, is just in general means that whatever you did was successful. So if you requested a piece of data, successful. If you put a piece of data, successful. Anything like that. A 300 style request is going to be redirect. It means content was maybe moved or anything like that. So those signify pages that maybe have changed, and you can still see like old traffic going to those. In this case, it's going to be less for troubleshooting and more just for actual like Webflow analytics. But the big ones we'd also want to look at is something like 400 or 500 errors. 400 is a client-side error, which everyone's most familiar with, of like 404. So we could actually click on, say, a site and view all our 400 errors. And a lot of these would probably be 404s, where people are maybe going to pages that aren't found, or 403s, where they're trying to hit a site that they don't have access to. And immediately, yep, we can see we have somebody who's hitting our site for this wpad.dat file, and they've made 79,000 calls to it. So that shows that maybe something is set up to point there that shouldn't be. We can click on it and see who all those consumers are. track down maybe if someone's trying to pull information that they shouldn't be. But at the end of the day, we can kind of see where these are coming from. And if we find it malicious, we can end up, pulling some kind of remediation either to block those senders or see what's on the web page or anything like that. But realistically, let's go see what's going on in this C site with all of this traffic. And we can see that most of those calls have been successful. And realistically, it's all probably going to be from this 172.30.0.106 address. On the other hand, though, taking it back to an analytics approach, you can also see that the most live web pages on there as well, which is just going to be the main page and their events page. So this helps kind of give a rough overview of if people are hammering things that don't exist or if they're getting redirected. Or the other part is the 500 errors, which luckily we don't have any of, but those are going to be the server-side ones that indicate that there's something wrong with your hosting platform. So moving forward, we're going to start going a little more granularly into a site-by-site basis. And that would be looking at daily bandwidth spikes. So we can split this out two ways again of bandwidth versus HTTP calls. But at this point, we can see like our most popular pages for a site. So say we want to see what's going on that C site because it had so many calls. We can go ahead and select that from our filter. It's going to pull in the hourly bandwidth of this, which the previous pages were based on daily bandwidth consumption. That gets really spiky though, because you're going to have obviously like lulls in the evening time where people aren't browsing. But then you also see the highs in the day and then potential things like this, where again, this is a boom that kind of correlates to that previous spike in calls that we saw. And so you can see what those highest hitting pages are, as well as the response codes that happened with that. So maybe if a site was getting hammered, trying to basically have a denial of service attack, you could see that those 200 requests might start going to 500 or 400 requests. And then as well, look at the page calls. So page calls and bandwidth should reasonably correlate, but not always, because you may have a very heavy hitting page. So on this C site, we can also go and see what the response codes were for that, and if something was timing out potentially or anything else. So in this case, we do see a lot of redirects and see that frequency throughout the day. We can also go look at another one, and let's clear our filters here. See that, for example, this site, realistically, the only thing that's actually hitting it heavily is going to be the main page. Past that, there isn't much traffic to it. So in this case, there's probably not much to worry about. And then on B site, we can poke around and see that there's another example of a spike in bandwidth. So we could actually click on that spike and see what that was. And realistically, it's just a spike in people to the home page. Again, nothing too serious to worry about. But I believe on C site, one of these are actually able to find, for example, somebody hammering and trying to brute force log in to a web form. They were posting data over and over. So let's see if we can track that down. But moving forward, the last step is we're going to also look at how much bandwidth all these calls are consuming and try and correlate that. Again, we're going to see a very similar style graph, but this C site that keeps getting called over and over 3 million times throughout the month, we can actually see that one of the biggest things on it is potentially this American flag page. So what better thing to hammer your website with than loading tons of data of American flag? So this may correlate to something where that is being called internally and going over the NIC or anything like that. In this case, it's not, but we can also see all those top consumers. So again, if someone's trying to pull up a high loading web page over and over to potentially like degrade your connection speed or anything like that, we should be able to drill into that pretty quickly and see. The other part is seeing if there are pages on your website that are consuming an abnormal amount, just in terms of maybe something needs to be compressed, like that American flag, or anything else like that. And it just helps us really quickly drill down into if someone is hitting some of these pages unnecessarily, and then what they're actually doing with it. And then from there, there's not actually ever going to be any remediation through Tableau. At the end of the day, it's just a quick report. But this would be able to quickly tell us like what site we can go to, figure out what host that's on, and then start looking at some of the connection logs and figure out if we need to block that or implement something on a web form, or potentially restructure some of our pages. So that is that's most of what we would do through Tableau. Like I said, at the end of the day, all the remediation will be by hand, but it is nice to have a quick look. Oh, we need to clear a filter in there. But quick look at a high level view of any kind of activity on your site.
That's awesome, Eli. Looks like you could quickly identify some issues that are affecting your web traffic through that. And of course, who doesn't love downloading an American flag JPEG over and over again, right?
Right.
All right, Eli, that was awesome. If there are any questions, you can go to interworks.com and always hit up our blog, and you can find a contact us form there. Eli, thank you so much for joining us, and that was an excellent presentation. And if you wanted, we'll put this up on the blog so you can rewatch it anytime you want. Again, we are here every other Friday. You can sign up at our website, interworks.com/events. Eli, I hope to see you again soon, man.
Thanks, Chris. It was a good pleasure.
Thanks, man. Appreciate it. See ya.